The entire restaurant fell silent the moment she stepped through the glass doors. Conversations faded, forks paused in midair, and every member of the staff suddenly found a reason to be somewhere else. Her reputation had arrived long before she did. She was known across the city as the billionaire who expected perfection, tolerated nothing less, and walked away from businesses with a single devastating review. People feared her wealth, her influence, and the cold expression that rarely changed. Yet hidden beneath that intimidating image was a story no one had cared enough to understand. The restaurant was elegant but welcoming, filled with fresh flowers, polished wooden tables, and sunlight pouring through wide windows. At a quiet corner table sat Daniel, a 35-year-old single father who had spent the entire morning working at a construction site. His hands were rough, his shirt showed signs of honest labor, and exhaustion rested on his face. Across from him sat his 8-year-old daughter Emma, happily drawing in a small notebook while waiting for the simple meal they could barely afford. Daniel had promised her one special dinner after months of saving every extra dollar. Even though life had become difficult after losing his wife 3 years earlier, he never allowed hardship to steal his daughter's smile. The billionaire was escorted to the finest table in the restaurant, but the atmosphere remained tense. Every server quietly stepped back, hoping someone else would take responsibility. The manager forced himself to approach her, though even he struggled to hide his nervousness. Everyone expected another unpleasant evening. They had all heard stories of impossible demands, harsh criticism, and impossible standards. Daniel noticed the fear spreading through the room. It reminded him of something he had learned after tragedy entered his own life. Pain often wore a disguise. Sometimes it looked like silence. Sometimes it appeared as anger. Sometimes the people who pushed everyone away were quietly hoping that someone would finally stay. Before anyone could settle the situation, the manager accidentally dropped a tray while approaching the billionaire's table. Crystal glasses shattered across the polished floor. Several guests looked over in surprise. Embarrassment spread across the manager's face, while the servers froze completely. Nobody wanted to move closer. They feared making things even worse. Daniel glanced toward Emma, who simply looked back with gentle curiosity. Without saying a word, he stood from his chair. He carefully walked toward the broken glass, asked for a towel, and calmly helped the embarrassed manager clear the area before anyone could get hurt. He was not trying to impress anyone. He simply believed that helping another person should never depend on status or circumstance. The billionaire watched him carefully. Unlike everyone else, Daniel never looked frightened or impressed by her wealth. He simply treated every person with the same quiet respect. That simple difference caught her attention more than any expensive gift or flattering compliment ever could. After returning to his table, Daniel resumed helping Emma with her drawing as though nothing unusual had happened. The restaurant slowly returned to normal, yet the billionaire continued watching the father and daughter from across the room. She noticed how Daniel smiled despite wearing old work boots. She noticed how Emma laughed over a simple meal that many wealthy families would overlook. She noticed something she had not experienced in years: genuine peace. Her own childhood had been very different. She had inherited enormous wealth after years of family conflict and impossible expectations. Every relationship became a business transaction. Every conversation carried hidden motives. Over time, she stopped trusting kindness because too many people had offered it only when they wanted something in return. Eventually, protecting herself became easier than opening her heart. As the evening continued, Emma accidentally dropped one of her colored pencils, which rolled across the polished floor toward the billionaire's table. Daniel apologized and walked over to retrieve it, but before he reached it, the billionaire quietly picked it up herself. She looked at the bright drawing Emma had been creating and paused for several seconds. The picture showed a father holding his daughter's hand beneath a bright blue sky. There were no expensive cars, giant houses, or luxury vacations. There was only love. Something inside the billionaire quietly shifted. For the first time in many years, she realized that everything she had spent her life chasing could never replace the warmth she saw sitting at that small corner table. Success had filled her bank accounts but emptied her personal life. Awards had replaced friendships. Luxury had replaced simple happiness. When Daniel thanked her for returning the pencil, he did so with complete sincerity. He expected nothing in return. That honesty broke through years of emotional walls she had carefully built around herself. After finishing their meal, Daniel prepared to pay the bill, carefully counting every dollar in his wallet. The manager approached with an unexpected smile. Someone had already covered the entire dinner. Daniel immediately assumed there had been a mistake, but the manager quietly explained that a guest wished to remain anonymous. Daniel looked across the room, where the billionaire simply offered a respectful nod before returning her attention to the window. He understood. Rather than feeling embarrassed, he felt grateful. More importantly, he hoped she understood that her gesture meant far more than the cost of dinner. It represented something she had not shared with the world in a very long time: kindness freely given. Several weeks later, Daniel received an invitation to interview for a facilities management position at one of the billionaire's companies. He almost declined, believing he lacked the qualifications, but Emma encouraged him to believe in himself the same way he always believed in her. The interview surprised him. Instead of discussing profits, the billionaire asked about responsibility, honesty, and perseverance. She had quietly investigated Daniel's background and discovered years of consistent hard work, volunteer service, and neighbors who described him as someone who always showed up when others needed help. Daniel was offered the position, not because he had impressed a billionaire, but because his character had spoken long before his resume ever could. Over the following months, something remarkable happened inside the company. Employees noticed that the once distant billionaire began greeting staff members by name. She listened more carefully during meetings. She introduced programs supporting working parents and employees facing financial hardship. Her business remained successful, but now people admired her for something even greater than her wealth. Daniel never claimed credit for the transformation. He simply continued living according to the values he wanted Emma to inherit. He believed kindness was strongest when it expected no reward. Years later, Emma would remember that ordinary dinner far more clearly than any expensive vacation. She remembered how one quiet decision changed several lives without anyone planning it. Her father had not confronted power with anger. He had answered fear with compassion, and compassion had accomplished what fear never could. The restaurant staff also remembered that evening. They learned that judging people by rumors often hides the truth waiting beneath the surface. Every person carries invisible burdens, and sometimes the smallest act of courage becomes the beginning of someone else's healing. The billionaire entered the restaurant believing the world feared her. She left understanding that respect earned through kindness lasts much longer than fear created by power. Daniel arrived hoping only to share a simple dinner with his daughter. He left having reminded an entire room that humanity is measured not by wealth, titles, or influence, but by the quiet choices people make when no one expects anything from them. And that is how one exhausted single father, waiting patiently at an ordinary restaurant table, changed the life of a woman who had everything except the one thing money could never buy: a heart willing to trust kindness once again.